Imagine a man so wealthy that economists 7 centuries later still cannot calculate how much he was worth. A man whose name was drawn in gold on European maps, while Europe itself barely knew he existed. A man who, on a single journey, flooded entire nations with so much gold that he destroyed their economies, not out of malice, but simply because that is what happens when a man of his magnitude passes through. His name was Mansa Musa. And the question we are about to answer, whether this African emperor was truly more powerful than the ancient pharaohs of Egypt, is not merely a matter of historical curiosity. It is a question that forces us to reconsider everything we think we know about power, wealth, and the civilizations that have shaped our world. The story you are about to hear is real. Every detail is drawn from historical sources, Arabic scholars, medieval chroniclers, Egyptian records, and maps that still survive to this day. What you will discover is a history that was not hidden by accident, and once you know it, you will never see the ancient world the same way again. To understand Mansa Musa, you must first understand the world he came from, because it was a world the history books for too long refused to fully describe. It is the early 14th century, while Europe is still clawing its way out of the Dark Ages, ravaged by plague, feudal wars, and poverty. Deep in the heart of West Africa, something extraordinary is rising. The Mali Empire stretches across an area larger than Western Europe. From the Atlantic coast to the Great Bend of the Niger River, from the scorching salt flats of the Sahara to the forests of the south, this empire controls territory that modern-day scholars estimate encompassed all or parts of what are now Guinea, Senegal, Mauritania, Gambia, and Mali itself. At its heart lies a web of trade routes so sophisticated, so meticulously organized, that goods, gold, salt, ivory, silk, spices, flow through them like blood through veins. The Mali Empire does not merely participate in the global economy of its time, it is the global economy. Historians estimate that at the peak of Mansa Musa's reign, the Mali Empire produced more than half of the world's known supply of gold. Not gold trinkets, not decorative pieces, structural monetary gold, the very foundation upon which the medieval world's commerce was built. And at the center of all of this is a city that in the 14th century is one of the most extraordinary places on earth, Timbuktu. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine what it looked like. A city built at the edge of the Sahara, where the golden dunes meet the slow, muddy waters of the Niger River. The air smells of dust, spice, and dried fish carried from the river markets. Merchants from Morocco, Egypt, Portugal, and the Middle East haggle in a dozen languages beneath the shade of mud brick arcades. Scholars in flowing white robes carry manuscripts through the narrow streets, heading toward the great mosques that rise from the city's heart like monuments to human ambition. At Timbuktu's peak, some historians estimate that 1 in 4 of its 100,000 inhabitants was a student or a scholar. This was the world Mansa Musa inherited when he became the 9th Mansa, the emperor of the Mali Empire, sometime around 1312. His ascension to power is itself surrounded by a story almost too extraordinary to believe. His predecessor, known to history as Abu Bakr II, had become consumed by a question that would haunt many rulers of his age. What lay beyond the endless horizon of the Atlantic Ocean? In an act of staggering ambition, or madness depending on how you look at it, Abu Bakr II assembled a fleet, not a small fleet. According to the account that Mansa Musa himself would later give to Egyptian officials, it was a fleet of 2,000 ships, 2,000 vessels loaded with men, food, and supplies, sent westward across the Atlantic to find whatever lay on the other side. None of them ever came back. Abu Bakr II led the expedition himself, appointing Mansa Musa as his deputy, a caretaker of the empire until his return. When weeks became months and months became years, and no ship returned, no message arrived, no survivor washed up on any shore, Mansa Musa was crowned emperor of the Mali Empire. He would rule it for the next 25 years, and he would do so with a vision, a discipline, and a force of personality that would leave the entire world breathless. Musa was not merely a ruler, he was an administrator of genius. Understanding that an empire of this size could not be governed from a single throne, he divided it into provinces, appointing governors to manage each one. He standardized trade, he enforced law, he invited scholars, architects, and poets from across the Muslim world to come to Mali, and he paid for their journey himself. Under his patronage, the University of Sankore in Timbuktu was transformed into one of the greatest centers of learning in the medieval world, staffed with jurists, astronomers, mathematicians, and theologians. At its height, it is said to have housed a collection of manuscripts so vast that some historians compare it to the legendary Library of Alexandria. He was also a man of deep personal faith. A devout Muslim, Musa observed the 5 pillars of Islam with the same discipline he brought to governance. And it was this faith that would, in 1324, lead him to do something that would shake the known world to its foundations. He would go on pilgrimage to Mecca, and he would not go quietly.
The year is 1324. Mansa Musa, Emperor of Mali, Lord of the mines of Wangara, commander of one of the largest armies on earth, announces that he will perform the Hajj, the sacred pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim is called to make at least once in their lifetime. What followed was not a pilgrimage. It was a spectacle so colossal, so unprecedented, that every civilization it touched was permanently altered. Musa's caravan departed from the Mali capital and began the long journey north and east across the Sahara Desert toward Egypt and then onward to the holy city of Mecca. With him, according to the Arabic sources that recorded the event in astonished detail, were 60,000 people. 60,000! His military escorts, administrators, slaves, servants, wives, courtiers, cooks, scholars, and subjects. Among them, 500 personal servants, each one carrying a staff made of solid gold, weighing roughly 10 pounds. 80 camels followed behind, each loaded with between 50 and 300 pounds of raw gold dust. He provided food for the entire company, every day for the entire journey. When they rested, their encampments spread across the desert like a small city. When they moved, the earth shook beneath their feet. In July of 1324, the caravan arrived at the outskirts of Cairo. They camped for 3 days by the pyramids of Giza, a detail so rich with historical symbolism it almost defies belief. The ruler who would one day be compared to the pharaohs, resting in the shadow of their greatest monuments, preparing to enter the city that sat at the center of the medieval world. The meeting between Mansa Musa and the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt, al-Nasir Muhammad, was charged with tension from the very beginning. Protocol demanded that any visiting dignitary bow before the Sultan, kiss the ground in the formal expression of submission. Mansa Musa refused. He was a pilgrim on his way to Mecca, he said, and he would prostrate himself before God alone. The Egyptian envoys pressed him. An audience with the Sultan was not optional. Eventually, a compromise was found. Musa entered the Sultan's court, and instead of bowing to the Sultan, he prostrated himself in prayer to Allah, as if offering salat, and then rose and greeted the Sultan as an equal.
The Sultan, whose own prestige was considerable, understood immediately that this was not a vassal in front of him. This was a peer. Then came the gold. Contemporary Arab historian al-Umari, who visited Cairo in the years immediately following Musa's pilgrimage and spoke to those who had witnessed it firsthand, left behind an account that reads like a fever dream. He wrote that this man, referring to Musa, flooded Cairo with his generosity, that he left no court official, no holder of royal office, no person of any standing without a substantial gift of gold. That the Cairenes made extraordinary profits from him in buying, selling, giving, and taking, and that they exchanged so much gold that they depressed its value in Egypt and caused its price to fall. This was not a metaphor. This was a macroeconomic event of historic proportions.
Gold was the currency of the medieval world. When Mansa Musa arrived in Cairo with thousands of pounds of it and began distributing it freely to beggars in the streets, overpaying at every bazaar, tipping merchants with fistfuls of gold dust, donating 20,000 ounces to the poor of Cairo alone, and then repeating the gesture in Medina and Mecca, he flooded the market with so much gold that its value collapsed. The price of gold in Egypt fell by approximately 25% and did not recover for more than 12 years. 12 years, the length of a child's schooling. An entire generation of Egyptian merchants watched their savings and their trade erode because one man had passed through their city with more wealth than their nation possessed. When Mansa Musa learned on his return journey of the economic devastation his generosity had caused, he did something extraordinary. He attempted to fix it. He borrowed back as much gold as he could from Cairo's moneylenders, paying enormous rates of interest, removing gold from circulation to bring prices back up. It worked until he returned to Mali and repaid every debt in one single enormous payment, flooding the market again and crashing the price of gold for the second time. In one pilgrimage, Mansa Musa had personally destroyed, repaired, and then destroyed again the gold economy of Egypt, the Middle East, and, by extension, Europe. The ripples reached every trading city from Alexandria to Venice. And when he finally arrived in Mecca, the spiritual destination of his journey, he was no longer merely an African emperor, he was a legend. Word traveled through the Muslim world at the speed of caravans. There is a king in the Sudan, they said, using the Arabic term for the land south of the Sahara, who has more gold than the mind can comprehend. Scholars, architects, and poets began making their way toward Mali. Musa recruited some of the finest minds of his age, including the celebrated Andalusian scholar and architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, whom he brought back to Timbuktu to design the great Djinguereber Mosque, a structure that still stands today, 7 centuries later, as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. While he was away on pilgrimage, his armies had not been idle. The city of Gao had been taken, and Timbuktu, one of the greatest cities in the medieval world, was firmly under his control. Mansa Musa returned to Mali not merely as a king, he returned as the most famous ruler on earth. Now, having witnessed what this man did, the scale of his wealth, the reach of his power, the impact of a single journey on the economies of entire nations, we want to ask you something. Was Mansa Musa greater than you imagined? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and hold on to that question, because in what follows, we will answer the one that brought you here in the first place. For thousands of years, the pharaohs of Egypt have stood as the supreme symbol of human power. Ramesses the Great, Thutmose III, Amenhotep III. These were men who commanded armies of hundreds of thousands, built monuments that still defy modern engineering, and ruled over one of the most complex and enduring civilizations in human history.
The very word pharaoh carries a weight of absolute authority that echoes through the centuries. So when we ask whether Mansa Musa was more powerful than the pharaohs, we are not asking a simple question. We are asking whether a 14th century African emperor could stand on equal footing with the most exalted rulers antiquity ever produced. Let us examine the evidence. In terms of territory, Mansa Musa's Mali Empire at its peak was vast, but the Egyptian Empire under Thutmose III, which stretched from the Euphrates River in the north to the Fourth Cataract of the Nile in the south, was comparably impressive. On territory alone, the contest is roughly even. In terms of military power, the pharaohs fielded some of the most formidable armies of the ancient world, equipped with iron weapons, war chariots, and professional soldiers trained from boyhood. Mansa Musa's armies were large and effective, but the military technology of the 14th century, while more sophisticated in some respects, must be measured against different standards. This, too, is largely a draw. But when we come to wealth, real, tangible, world-altering wealth, the comparison shifts dramatically. Even the most conservative modern economists who have attempted to estimate Mansa Musa's net worth have arrived at figures that strain credibility. Some place it at the equivalent of $400 billion in today's money. Others simply say it is incalculable, that there is no modern framework that can meaningfully express what it meant to control more than half the world's gold supply at a time when gold was the basis of all global commerce. Time magazine, in a contemporary assessment, concluded there is really no way to put an accurate number on his wealth. No pharaoh, not even Ramesses II, who built more monuments than any other Egyptian ruler and whose empire stretched across 3 continents, controlled anything close to that proportion of the world's monetary foundation. And then there is the question of global influence. The pharaohs were powerful within their world, the Mediterranean, the Near East, the upper reaches of Africa. But Mansa Musa's influence by the time of his death touched every corner of the known world. His name was spoken in Cairo, in Baghdad, in Fez, in Granada, in Lisbon, and in Venice. In 1375, 50 years after his pilgrimage, the Catalan Atlas, one of the most important maps in the history of European cartography, depicted him seated on a golden throne in the heart of West Africa, wearing a crown of gold, holding a golden scepter in one hand and a golden orb in the other. He was the only sub-Saharan African ruler ever depicted on a medieval European map. The cartographers did not need to label him. They painted him in gold, and that was sufficient.
But Mansa Musa's true legacy cannot be measured in gold alone. It is measured in the institutions he built, institutions that outlasted him by centuries. The Djinguereber Mosque, built in 1327 at his instruction, still stands in Timbuktu. The University of Sankore, which he transformed into one of the greatest centers of learning in the medieval world, drew scholars from Egypt, Morocco, Andalusia, and the Middle East. At its peak, the university housed an estimated 25,000 students and a library containing close to 1 million manuscripts, a collection so vast that some historians consider it the largest accumulation of written knowledge since the Library of Alexandria. He introduced legal reform. He standardized the administration of the empire. He built mosques not just in Mali, but at every stop along his pilgrimage route, commissioning a new one each Friday, as if laying a trail of sacred stones across the continent. He deepened the penetration of Islam throughout West Africa in ways that shaped the religious landscape of the region for the next 7 centuries. And yet, and here lies one of history's most haunting ironies, the very fame that Mansa Musa earned during his lifetime may have contributed to the catastrophe that followed.
When European cartographers drew his image in gold on their maps, they were not simply paying him tribute, they were advertising. The image of a black king swimming in unimaginable wealth, seated in the heart of a continent Europeans barely knew, ignited a hunger that would not be satisfied for generations. Portuguese explorers began probing the West African coastline. Spanish and later Dutch and English ships followed. The rumors of Timbuktu's gold, rumors set in motion in large part by the stories of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage, became one of the driving forces behind European exploration of Africa. And that exploration, as history would record in blood, eventually became conquest. Mansa Musa died around 1337. His son, Magan, inherited the throne, but lacked the iron hand of his father. Within a generation, civil war had fractured the empire. The kingdom of Mossi raided from the south. The Songhai Empire began absorbing Mali's eastern territories. The wealth that had seemed inexhaustible began to drain away into the sands of history. The empire that had once produced half the world's gold collapsed. The city of Timbuktu, that extraordinary center of learning and commerce, eventually fell into obscurity, so thoroughly forgotten by the outside world that for European explorers in the 19th century, reaching it became the great adventure of the age. When they finally arrived, they found a dusty, quiet city, beautiful, ancient, but no longer the thundering heart of a global empire. So, was Mansa Musa more powerful than the pharaohs? The honest answer is that the question itself resists a simple yes or no. The pharaohs built civilizations that endured for 3,000 years. Their monuments are the most recognizable on Earth. Their cultural influence on the ancient world is beyond calculation. But Mansa Musa, in a single lifetime, in a single reign, accumulated a concentration of wealth so extraordinary that it distorted the global economy. He built institutions of learning that survived him by centuries. He put his name on a map drawn by people who had never seen his face. He walked across the Sahara with 60,000 people and changed the world simply by passing through it. The pharaohs built their power over millennia with the labor of generations and the loyalty of gods. Mansa Musa built his in 25 years, and the world is still feeling the echoes. Perhaps the most powerful thing we can say about him is this: 700 years after his death, we are still talking about him. His mosques still stand. His manuscripts are still being cataloged and digitized. His name still resonates, not as a legend, not as a myth, but as a man, a real man who lived in a real city and who proved to the world that greatness has no single color, no single continent, and no single face. Thank you for staying with us to the very end. That is not something every viewer does, and it matters more than you know. If this story made you see the ancient world differently, we would love to hear from you. Do you believe Mansa Musa was more powerful than the pharaohs? Or do you think the Egyptians, with their 3,000 years of continuous civilization, still hold the title? Leave your answer in the comments. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a documentary, because the best is still to come.